You don't want to enforce the mask policy? Fine, but the state auditor is gonna find out too. Long one. Sorry. But here's the story about how I got my district manager in trouble for not allowing us to enforce the mask mandate in our restaurant. We have a statewide mask mandate. It is illegal for us to serve people without masks. And the only time it's acceptable is when they're seated at a socially distanced table and eating. It's been this way for over a year now. Despite these clear rules, specified by our security at the front and by signs on the doors, we still get at least a few people a day coming in without masks. If they do this, we are instructed to tell them to wear one. If they don't have one, we have some in the back and are supposed to offer it to them. If they still refuse the mask, or pull some medical exemption bullshit, we are legally required to tell them to put on a face shield or leave our property, as we will not be serving them without one. Our store manager, however, told us that our district manager, DM, only wants us to take their order quickly, have it packaged to go, and to get them out of the store, rather than refuse service. I went along with this for maybe a week, until we had 2 guys come in without masks. I told them to please wear one and they said, "Oh, your coworker is getting us some." I said all right and finished up their order. By the time my coworker came back and said we don't have any more masks to give, I was already done and handing them their receipt. I said, "I'm sorry, but we don't have any more masks. So I'm going to have to ask you to wait outside. I know your number. I'll bring it out to you." The guy replies, "You know, it's illegal for you to tell us to leave for not wearing a mask." I just kind of laughed because that's fucking ridiculous, and said, "No, it's not." He goes, "Yeah, it is," angrily. And I reply, "No, it's not. We're a private business. We can refuse service to anyone for any reason." He gets pissed. He asks to talk to my manager. I grab him and they talk for a few minutes while I do other things. After, he asks me to talk to him in his office. He tells me the company policy. I tell him I'm not comfortable with potentially infectious people not only standing near me without a mask in a pandemic, but standing near other customers, and refer back to our signs and state law as to why. He says he understands, but that we're a customer is always right business and this is an extension of that. I fought back my logic and anger and prioritized securing money for bills, and agreed. I specifically told him I'm not going to apologize for enforcing state law where I can in a pandemic. And he said he understands. And I went back to work. Skip forward a few weeks. I'm begrudgingly following policy for less egregious offenders. Mask under nose. But still calling out those without masks, as most of my coworkers are doing and agree with as well. It's a weird middle ground of enforcement that only happens half the time. And if the customer is difficult, most of my coworkers just give up and move on. One day our DM, boss's boss, shows up to train an employee on being a shift manager. The whole store acts differently when he's here. It's now less about what works when working, and more about follow exact policy when he's watching, which is all the time. I'm on orders, and in walk 2 guys. Yet again, without masks. DM is standing behind me watching others when I ask both of them to wear a mask. I can hear him behind me stop and watch my interaction. They just outright refuse and start reciting their order. I don't put anything in, and tell them again to please put on a mask. The DM literally pushes me aside, enters in the food, runs the order and hands them the receipt. He gives me a look like I'm in trouble. I give him a look like he's fucking crazy. And we don't address it for another hour or 2. Getting in trouble with the DM is pretty much asking to get fired. But this was a hill I was willing to die on. In walks a state auditor, dressed as a regular customer. Prior to restaurant job, I worked in legal compliance for 4 years and dealt with state auditors almost daily. Even doing their job for a few months, I know what they look like and how they behave. And even swore I'd seen this guy once or twice before. He comes in, orders simple, and goes to sit down near the counter where he can hear and pull out his tablet to take notes. He's paying very close attention to everything in the back as opposed to texting and not hearing. His number get called the first 3 times like a normal customer. So I'm convinced he's an auditor. As the universe aligns, in walks a family with sporadic masks. Dad and son have one. Mom and other son do not. DM is in the back watching the grill. So I take my moment and loudly ask them to please wear a mask. Mom says she and her son are medically exempt. I say alright. Then you need to wear a face shield. She says that's not part of the rules. I say yes, it is. We have a sign you walked past indicating as such. I smiled massively behind my mask when she asked for the manager to speak to. And made sure to go get the DM. He walks up, talks to them briefly, goes through with their order and sends them on their way. He turns and calls my name clearly, in view of all co-workers and the auditor who was very clearly paying attention, and tells me to speak with him in the office. He chews me out in the back about not following company policy and they switch my shift from orders to clean up in the dining area. I go out to clean and see the maskless family waiting for their food uncomfortably close to the auditor who's now squished in his booth trying to keep distance, rapidly taking notes. Maybe 10 minutes later the auditor gets his food and asks me a question before he leaves. Were you reprimanded by your boss for asking them to wear masks? He asks. Yes. He blinked in surprise. Who reprimanded you? I smiled again. The district manager. He nodded, thanked me for the service and food, and left. A few days later we had a letter addressed by the state to our DM and our store in particular, displayed on the board for all to see about the importance of enforcing mask policy in a pandemic, and that if further infractions are incurred and policy is not enforced, we will be forcibly shut down. My store manager never brought it up again when I and others asked customers to put on a fucking mask. I've seen the DM once since. He gave me an angry look and hasn't said a word to me. TLDR. Managers told me not to follow state law and enforce the mask mandate for customers because they want the customer's money. I get yelled at for asking a customer to wear a mask while a state auditor visits and they get in trouble for it. Very satisfying to read. Also, the customer is not always right. That policy creates monsters. The customer is always right loosely translates to, our profits are more important than our people. The way to write the sign is, we do not permit people without masks to be on our property. Not wearing a mask on our property is trespassing. Then the conversation can be oriented around, will you wear a mask or do I need to call the police to trespass you from the property? Changing the conversation from their right to not wear a mask to their right to trespass. Along with your confidence that the police will back you up. And maybe a comment that if you are trespassed you can't come back. Not just that day, but indefinitely. Changes the tone of the discussion. I saw this posted on FB and loved it. I'm medically exempt from having to deal with people not wearing masks. It would be a HIPAA violation for me to disclose my condition. One of my favorite customer interactions ever. When I was doing tour guide work involved a customer waiting for their tour before it started. And I'm just kind of schmoozing and letting people know they should pee before we start. Asking people where they are from and how they're finding their visit. Mostly tourists were our base. And for some reason he makes an offhand remark about how the customer is always right, and I responded with a smile about how I don't buy into that philosophy because customers can be entitled and unrealistic. And I much prefer Richard Branson's stance that supporting your employees in favor of unruly customers will translate to better service for everyone else, and teach jerks to be less awful to staff in any setting. The customer who'd made the quips nodded and quietly agreed with me. And another customer laughed and applauded and said something the lines of, "Preach it." Quote. This was super satisfying to read. Reminds me of a barbecue restaurant I frequent in the California Bay Area. I went there during the middle of the pandemic when food service was allowed but dining in was still banned. But the owner, Texas expat that he was, clearly didn't think the rules applied to him, and had all his tables and chairs set up like normal and a very vocal policy of, "We only sell take out. Wink wink. But if you buy takeout, wink." And just happened to sit down at one of these tables and eat. Wink wink. There's nothing I can do to stop you. Wink. The next time I came by a few months later, there were a bunch of printouts stapled to every flat surface and wall with a page-long rant about how Gavin Newsom, King of California, was making insane tyrannical demands and putting the livelihoods of good businesses in danger, and if you wanted to eat here then just be aware that you were doing so at your own risk and that overzealous state officials may fine you for choosing to do so. The next time I came by a few months after that, all the printouts were gone and all the tables and chairs were stacked and cleared away, and they appeared to be COVID compliant in all ways that I could see. DM is so deficit. He probably thinks you called the state auditor. He can't handle that he got caught red-handed knocking down the COVID rules. What a douche. I hope you tell him. Tuunt from the internet says DM is a douche. Lol. This. Not only for the well-being of others, but even if the DM wanted to play fast and loose with mask rules. Don't think for a second there won't be auditors coming. What? You didn't think ahead and expect that you'll be watched? Thank you for being a decent human being. It's sad that that's something worthy of outright praise now. But that's the world we apparently live in now. I'm so fucking thankful that I'm self-employed now. The customer is always right about what services and products we should offer. What the customer no longer wants, we will no longer offer. What the customer wants but we don't have will be something we will look into getting. That's what it is supposed to mean when the customer is always right. Too bad there wasn't a fine or something, just to really hammer in what a douche the DM is. At this point I don't think there should be second chances or opportunities to do the right thing. It's been a fucking year. Nobody is unaware of the rules at this point. If I were in charge, people would be getting fines left, right, and center. I worked at Stop & Shop in CT. Their policy was the customer isn't always right but the customer is a customer. Sounds like the same ducking thing to me. I would give you an award if I had one. Stay safe. Stay strong. I'm curious what state this is. In Ohio, there has been zero government enforcement whatsoever. Only the health inspectors are allowed to enforce the mask mandate. And they have about a 3 to 4 month waiting period to investigate complaints. Even then, they seem to only be issuing verbal warnings. No fines or punishment in any way. I have to say malicious compliance shouldn't have to be about basic public safety, but you are awesome for sticking it to them over this. Well done. Wish I had an award to give you. Instead, have a thumbs up. You did what was in your power to make your work safer for you and everyone else there. You did a great thing. Also, I am amazed how similar this sounds to my experience working at a thrift store. Our DMs are very serious about the mask policy, but several of our supervisors refused to enforce it back in 2020 and lost 100% of their employees' respect for it. They have since been forced to leave the company or improve their response. Well done. I hope the DM was transferred to the northern Alaska region. God, I wish I lived in a state that had this. Georgia refused a mask mandate, sued our capital city for enforcing one, and wrote it into our pandemic response that private businesses had the right to exempt themselves from enforcement of any mask mandates local jurisdictions passed. Everywhere you go down here you see signs on the doors to businesses saying, "We do not consent to enforcement of mask mandates on this premises." It sucks. I'm so glad I've gotten my second vaccine shot already. There are reasons people don't wear masks, like anxiety and other mental state issues, but nothing legal to exempt them from the law when laws are in place. In my experience, the people who have legitimate reasons or struggle with it do everything they can to stay home or hide that they struggle. It's 100% obvious when people say they have medical exemptions and are full of shit versus actually mean, "I have a good reason to struggle with a mask," and are respectful about it. One of my coworkers hates masks and starts hyperventilating whenever she wears them. But good luck having a conversation with her since she's always hiding on the other side of the room, distancing from people. She's not walking into a pizza place demanding to be served without her mask like a self-centered lunatic.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epicaricast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.